Before we dive into this story of survival, danger, and an unexpected bond on an alien world, make sure you hit that like button so more people can find tales like this. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you never miss the next adventure. Now, let's step into the crimson light of an alien jungle, where a single act of kindness will change everything. The jungle sang in alien voices as Captain Jackson Hale crouched at the stream's edge, filling his canteen with the cautious patience of a man who had learned the rhythm of danger. The water shimmered under twin suns, the surface rippling with reflections of crimson and gold, but he kept his eyes on the tree line. This world was all teeth and hunger. Every shadow could be watching him. He had been stranded here for 2 weeks after a NAV relay failure dropped his shuttle into the wrong orbit. The crash hadn't killed him, but the jungle seemed determined to correct that oversight. His days were measured in repairs and rations, in the slow, methodical work of survival. He had patched the comms array twice already, but the rescue beacon was silent. No ships passing. No voices on the static. The air was thick, hot, and sharp with the scent of blooming rot. He scanned the banks again, his right hand resting loosely on the grip of his pulse rifle. Something had been shadowing him since the morning, a feeling in the gut more than in the mind, the kind of instinct you didn't ignore if you wanted to live long beyond Earth's comfortable skies. A rustle. A faint crack of foliage. He froze. From the undergrowth, it emerged, no larger than a house cat, but lean to the bone, its frame trembling with each careful step. It had the shape of a feline but wrong in ways that made the hair rise on his neck. Limbs too long. Tail moving in slow, deliberate arcs. Eyes the color of molten amber, set with an intelligence far beyond instinct. Its coat was striped in black and burnished bronze, but the shine was gone from hunger. It stopped a meter away, staring at him, the heat haze air trembling between them. He knew the rules. Don't feed the wildlife. Don't encourage contact. Especially on a Class F predator world. But the thing didn't move to attack. It didn't hiss. It only stared, ribs sharp against its skin, until the look in its eyes became unbearable. "Damn it," he muttered, setting the canteen aside. From the side pocket of his vest, he pulled a strip of preserved meat, precious calories he could ill afford to give away. The little creature's head tilted as he tossed it gently onto the dirt between them. It moved with sudden grace, snatching the food, then retreating just far enough to devour it. The sound it made, not quite a purr, not quite a growl, vibrated low in its chest. When it was gone, it licked its muzzle, fixing him again with that unsettling, measuring gaze. For a moment he thought it might come closer. Instead, it turned, slipping back into the shadows without a sound. He was left with the image burned into his mind, those eyes, bright and alive, locking with his before disappearing. He finished filling his canteen, but his thoughts were elsewhere as he made the trek back to camp. The clearing where his shuttle lay was a fragile sanctuary, surrounded on all sides by the pulse and whisper of alien life. The hull was scorched, plating dented in from the crash, but he had power and shelter. A fire pit of blackened stones smoked faintly in the center, and his comms rig stood half disassembled under a tarpaulin. Hale sat by the beacon, adjusting a burned-out transceiver, but the cub's eyes kept intruding on the work. This planet's predators didn't beg. They didn't ask. They took. And yet, something in that encounter had felt different. Intentional. Night came fast here. The twin suns bled out into deep violet, and the jungle chorus shifted to night voices, lower, closer, always moving. Hale double-checked his perimeter alarms before sealing the shuttle hatch and lying down on the narrow bunk. Sleep came slow, the air heavy with heat and the faint memory of that strange purr. It was still in his ears when a sharp sound woke him, a distant, throaty roar that vibrated through the hull. Not the cub. Something bigger. Much bigger. He sat up, heart beating a little too fast. The roar came again, closer this time, a voice that seemed to bend the darkness toward it. He gripped his rifle, straining to hear past the rush of his own pulse. Then, silence. The kind of silence that made every nerve stretch tight. Something was out there, and he had a gut-deep certainty it was looking for him. Or maybe for the cub. The thought came unbidden, what if feeding it had marked him? What if, somewhere in this predator-thick jungle, a mother had scented the meat on her offspring's breath, and now she was coming? Hale sat in the dark, rifle across his knees, the jungle breathing around him. He didn't know it yet, but tonight was the last quiet night he'd ever have on this planet. The hunt had already begun. The jungle was awake long before the suns rose, its heartbeat thrumming through the damp soil beneath his boots. Hale moved carefully around the perimeter, checking the tripwires strung with crude noisemakers. The distant roar from last night still sat heavy in his mind, though the morning light softened it into something almost unreal. He tried to tell himself it had been a wandering predator passing through, nothing more, but instincts honed over years in hostile territories refused the comfort. He was tightening the last knot when the air shifted. A stillness fell over the clearing so abrupt it made his skin prickle. The jungle sounds dulled as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. He reached for his rifle without thinking. The first thing he saw were the eyes. Not the cub's bright amber, but a molten gold so deep it seemed to glow from within. They floated in the shadowed tree line, unblinking, watching. The figure stepped forward, slow, deliberate, each movement balanced like a predator ready to strike. She was taller than him by a head, her frame sleek and corded with muscle beneath a coat of short, striped fur. The stripes shifted with the light, catching flashes of bronze and shadow. Her head was feline but refined, her features sharp, eyes angled in a way that made every glance feel like a knife drawn. A long tail swayed behind her, not lazily but with the measured rhythm of control. She carried no weapon but none was needed. Every inch of her was made for the kill. Something heavy thudded into the dirt at his feet. He looked down to see the fresh carcass of a beast the size of a wild boar, its neck broken clean. She had thrown it to him. She stepped closer, her gaze locked on his, her pupils narrowing to slits as her nostrils flared. When she spoke, it was a blend of his own tongue and guttural sounds he'd never heard, the words shaped by a voice low and resonant, vibrating in his chest as much as in his ears. Her name was Shiraka. He didn't lower his rifle, but he didn't raise it either. The cub appeared from behind her, tail high, trotting straight toward him without hesitation. It stopped just shy of his boots, looking up at him as if introducing him to the towering presence above. Shiraka's gaze flicked between them, and her mouth curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. She spoke again, slower, words breaking into clearer form. She told him the cub was hers, her only offspring, and that by feeding it, he had entered into a bond not easily broken. In her culture, such an act carried meaning, obligation. A life debt. Hale wanted to argue, to explain that it had been nothing more than a moment of misplaced mercy, but the words died in his throat under the weight of her stare. She circled him, not touching, yet close enough that he could feel the shift of the air as she moved. Her tail brushed the dirt with the whisper of a blade. She asked questions and clipped phrases. Why he was here. Why his pack, his crew was gone. Why he smelled of metal and fire. He answered in guarded terms, telling her only that his ship had fallen from the sky and that he was waiting for others to come. The cub nudged his leg with its head before trotting back to her side. She crouched, one hand on the cub's back, eyes never leaving him. She told him the jungle was not safe for a lone male of any kind, that many had scented him already, and not all would come bearing gifts. There was a faint edge to her voice when she said it, a suggestion that she counted herself among those who could take him if she chose. Days passed in this strange rhythm. Shiraka appeared without sound and left without warning, sometimes with the cub, sometimes alone. She would watch him work on the shuttle, silent as the shadows. Occasionally she would bring him food, slabs of fresh meat from beasts he could not name, setting them down as if testing whether he would accept her offerings. At night, he would catch glimpses of her in the darkness beyond the campfires, her eyes gleaming faintly, the faint movement of her silhouette melting back into the trees. The cub grew bolder, coming into camp to curl up near his fire, its striped body rising and falling in quiet sleep. The tension between them was a living thing. She was predator and protector both, a presence that unsettled as much as it reassured. He could not decide if she saw him as an ally, a curiosity, or prey to be claimed in her own time. But every day she lingered longer, every question she asked cut closer to the bone, and something in her gaze made it harder to keep his distance. One evening she arrived without the cub. Her stride was faster, the set of her shoulders sharper. She told him others had found his scent and were coming, not beasts but something worse. Her eyes flicked toward the dark canopy, ears twitching toward sounds he could not hear. When he asked who, she stepped close enough that the heat of her breath touched his skin, her voice low, almost a growl. Not hunters of the forest, she said. Hunters of his kind. Her tail flicked once, sharp, then she turned toward the jungle, pausing only to look back at him with a warning in her gaze. Stay ready. And then she was gone into the trees, leaving him with the fading heat of her presence and the cold realization that whatever was coming for him was already on its way. The attack came at dawn, when the twin suns had barely touched the horizon and the jungle was still wrapped in the bluish shadows of night's retreat. Hale had been crouched by the fire pit, coaxing a flame from damp wood, when the first sound reached him, a low, layered growl that seemed to ripple through the ground rather than cut the air. His hand went to his rifle before his mind caught up, eyes sweeping the tree line in sharp, controlled arcs. Shapes moved between the trunks, heavy and deliberate. The faint gleam of scales caught what little light there was, then vanished. He didn't know their exact number, only that they were coordinated. The way they shifted their positions told him this was no random pack of predators. These things hunted like soldiers. A sudden crash of foliage to his left forced his aim that way. One of them burst into view, a reptilian mass of muscle and armored hide, its head low, its talons raking deep furrows in the dirt. He squeezed the trigger, the pulse rifle's discharge cracking like lightning, but the shot only grazed its shoulder. The creature roared and lunged. He sidestepped, firing again, the beam punching through its neck this time. It dropped in a twisting heap, but the victory was short-lived. 3 more emerged in its place, their jaws lined with serrated teeth, their eyes fixed on him with unblinking hunger. Then a new sound tore through the clearing, a roar deeper, sharper, that silenced even the reptiles. It was a sound he had heard only once before in the dark, when the jungle had held its breath. Shiraka came from the shadows like a blade drawn from its sheath, her leap covering the ground in a blur of stripes and muscle. She hit the nearest reptile full in the chest, her claws punching through its armor with wet precision. Her tail lashed as she twisted mid-strike, raking another across the snout and driving it back toward the trees. Hale kept firing, his shots carving through the confusion. They moved without speaking, yet perfectly in sync, her strikes driving enemies into his line of fire, his covering blasts giving her the seconds she needed to pivot and strike again. The cub darted in and out between their legs, too fast for the reptiles to catch, its teeth sinking into a hind limb here, a tail there, distracting just long enough for an opening. The fight was close, brutal, and far longer than he wanted it to be. When the last of them fell, its body smoking from a pulse shot to the chest, Hale was slick with sweat and breathing in short, controlled bursts. Shiraka stood over her kill, chest heaving, her fur matted dark where blood, both hers and theirs, streaked her side. He crossed the clearing toward her, but she straightened before he could speak, eyes hard and unyielding. She told him she was fine, though the tightness in her voice said otherwise. When he insisted, she finally allowed him to guide her to the fire. Her wound was deep but clean. He retrieved his medkit, kneeling beside her with steady hands. She didn't flinch as he cleaned the gash, though her gaze never left his face, as if studying something she had not yet decided about him. He worked quickly, sealing the flesh with a thermal patch before binding it with the last of his sterile wraps. When it was done, she exhaled slowly, her ears tilting back in what might have been the closest thing she had to a thank you. She told him the reptiles were not acting on instinct. Something had driven them toward him. Something that wanted him tested or weakened before it made its move. They spent the next 3 days together, moving deeper into the jungle to hunt for fresh meat and scouting the approaches to his camp. Hale learned the way she walked, silent, fluid, always aware of wind direction and cover. He learned her silences too, and the way her eyes would soften when the cub curled up in her arms to sleep. In turn she learned his patience. How he measured risk before every decision. How his hands stayed steady under pressure. She admitted one night, over the crackle of their shared fire, that her people valued such steadiness more than speed or strength, because strength faded, but will endured. The cub was never far from them. It would dart ahead in the undergrowth, returning with small kills it dropped proudly at their feet, its amber eyes glowing in the firelight. Hale caught himself speaking to it as if it could answer, and sometimes in its quick tilt of the head, he thought it understood. One evening, as the suns dipped low and the jungle's voice grew restless, Shiraka paused mid-stride, ears swiveling toward a sound only she seemed to hear. She told him to listen. At first, he heard nothing but the wind through the leaves. Then it came, a distant, rhythmic hum, mechanical and low, like the purr of an engine. Dropships. The word left her mouth like a curse. She said they were not hers and not his, which meant only one thing: outsiders who had no right here. And outsiders rarely came without taking something. She turned to him, her gaze sharp. The reptiles had been a test, she said. This was the real hunt. And he, whether he wished it or not, was now part of it. In that moment, Hale understood that whatever bond had formed between them was no longer a matter of choice. The enemy coming through the trees would not distinguish between them. Survival meant they would stand together or not at all. The hum grew louder, the leaves beginning to quiver under the displaced air. Hale tightened his grip on his rifle. Shiraka's tail flicked once, slow, deliberate. Somewhere behind them, the cub gave a low growl that was far too deep for its size. They waited in the shadows for the first glimpse of their enemy, the last of the day's light bleeding away, and in the heavy pause before the storm broke, Hale knew the fight ahead would decide far more than who lived through the night. The dropships broke through the canopy with a howl of thrusters, scattering leaves and sending a rush of hot air over the clearing. Hale could see them now, angular shapes painted in the dark grays of a mercenary outfit, their hulls marked with an insignia he didn't recognize but whose meaning was obvious: predators of another kind. The ships slowed, hovering just above the treetops, searchlights cutting wide arcs across the jungle floor. Shiraka stood beside him, her body low, tail rigid, every muscle drawn tight. The cub was crouched between them, silent, its golden eyes locked on the light sweeping the trees. Hale felt the thud of his own heartbeat against the rifle stock, a measured rhythm that steadied rather than shook him. He asked her what these mercenaries would want here, though he already suspected the answer. Her voice was flat when she said they would take what was strong enough to sell and kill what was not. The jungle was a hunting ground to them, and both of them were worth the chase. They didn't wait for the enemy to land. Shiraka moved first, guiding him through a narrow cut in the foliage, her steps silent despite her size. They worked their way to the ridgeline above the clearing where the first dropship was touching down. The hiss of hydraulics bled into the harsh click of boots on soil. Figures emerged, armored, masked, carrying rifles with wide muzzles meant for rapid suppression fire. Hale studied their formation. 2 scouts fanned out ahead, the others establishing a perimeter. He saw the gap almost immediately. Their right flank was exposed to the slope, the cover sparse enough that a quick assault could drive them into crossfire. Shiraka followed his gaze and gave the smallest nod. They moved together, each step a quiet agreement of trust. Hale set the traps first, rigging explosive charges from his shuttle's remaining power cells. Shiraka ranged ahead, marking paths with subtle scratches on bark for him to follow, her eyes always searching for the patterns of movement in the jungle's shifting shadows. When the first scout tripped the wire, the explosion lit the undergrowth with a brief white glare, flinging the mercenary backward. Hale's rifle barked twice, dropping another before the rest could react. The shouts started, sharp and clipped, and the mercenaries scrambled for cover. That was when Shiraka struck. She came from the side, a blur of striped fury, her claws punching through armor plates as if they were cloth. The cub darted at her heels, biting through straps and cables, yanking weapons free from startled hands. Hale moved with them, his shots deliberate, each one placed to protect her blind side as they pressed the attack. The fight was chaos compressed into heartbeats. Hale felt the air burn in his lungs, the ground shudder under his boots, the rifle grow hot in his grip. He dropped one, then another, and turned to find Shiraka standing over a fallen mercenary, her tail whipping behind her, her breath harsh and even. She was bleeding again, a line of crimson seeping through her fur, but her stance hadn't faltered. More were coming. The second dropship disgorged a squad with heavier weapons, their muzzles spitting fire through the trees. Hale ducked behind a fallen trunk, shards of bark spraying over him as shots ripped into the wood. Shiraka vaulted the same trunk in a single bound, landing among the newcomers before they could adjust their aim. Hale followed, driving them back toward the cliff edge where the jungle dropped away into mist. A stray shot clipped the cub's flank, and its cry cut through the noise like a blade. Hale felt something shift inside him, a sharp, cold clarity that burned away exhaustion. He surged forward, emptying the last of his rifle's charge into the mercenary responsible, the blast hurling the body into the abyss. The rest broke then, retreating toward their ships, but Shiraka was faster. She seized the nearest one, dragging him down with a twist of her claws before he could reach the ramp. Hale caught the other in his sights, his shot punching through the man's visor just as the hatch slammed shut. The dropships lifted off in a rush of heat and noise, pulling away through the canopy. Hale lowered his rifle slowly, scanning for any movement that didn't belong. The jungle was returning to itself, the sounds of birds and distant chittering filling the space the battle had carved out. He turned to Shiraka. She was watching him, her eyes bright even in the dim light, her breathing slowing. The cub limped toward them, pressing itself against her leg before looking up at Hale. He crouched, running a hand over its head gently, feeling the tremor of pain in its small frame. Shiraka stepped closer. Her voice was quiet now, but there was weight in every word. She told him he had fought like one of her own, not with the desperation of prey but with the resolve of a hunter. She said the bond they had was not one either of them could walk away from. Then she leaned in, her gaze holding his without flinching, and told him he was hers. Not as property but as pack. The rescue beacon at the camp would be active again, Hale knew it. The fight had drawn enough energy from his traps to finish the repairs, and now the signal would be carrying out into the black. Somewhere beyond the twin suns, a human ship might be turning toward this world. But standing there, the jungle alive around them, he understood the choice before it was even asked. He didn't want to leave. Not from fear, not from injury, but because in this place, alongside her, he had found a part of himself that space stations and starships could never have touched. Shiraka reached out, her clawed hand resting lightly on his shoulder. The cub leaned against his leg. The air was warm, thick with the sense of earth and blood and the faint spice of the alien blooms. Somewhere in the canopy above, a hunting bird called once, its voice sharp and clear. When the human ship finally came, skimming low over the treetops, Hale was already gone from the clearing. The crew would search, find the scorched signs of battle, and leave. They would never know that a man had stepped out of their world and into another, trading metal corridors for the heartbeat of the jungle. In the deep green shadows, Hale walked beside Shiraka, the cub at their heels, the path ahead unwritten but certain. Whatever hunts came next, they would face them together. And in the quiet between steps, he felt it again, that same low resonant sound from the first night, the sound that was not quite a purr and not quite a growl. Only now he understood it. It was home. Under the silver wash of the alien moonlight, Kale stood breathing hard, his pulse drumming in his ears. The humid air clung to his skin, carrying with it the faint musky scent of the Tigress alien who now paced in a slow predatory arc around him. Her name was Sura, though she had never spoken it aloud until tonight. Her voice, when it came, was a low rumble that slid along his nerves like warm silk. You saved my cub, you fought for him when no one else would, she said, her golden eyes never blinking. I repay my debts entirely. Kale's mind raced, remembering the hours in the swamp when he thought both his lungs would burst from the toxic gas pockets, how the jagged maws of swamp predators snapped shut inches from his legs, and how the cub clung to him, small, trembling, and so light it barely felt alive. Now the cub crouched nearby, its fur cleaner, its belly full, its gaze fixed on Kale with an almost human warmth. Sura's tail flicked once, the tip curling like a question mark. You risked your life for one not of your kind, she continued in a tone equal parts admiration and warning. Do you understand what that means in my culture? He swallowed 100 responses crowding his throat. He wanted to say it meant nothing, that he had done what anyone should do, but the truth was it meant everything to him, because in the desperate loneliness of this uncharted world the cub's trust had felt like the only real thing he had left. Her approach was slow, deliberate, the muscles in her shoulders rippling under sleek striped fur as she drew closer until the air between them felt thick enough to touch. Kale kept his eyes on hers, not out of defiance but because looking anywhere else felt like surrender. The sounds of the swamp faded, replaced by the soft growl deep in her chest. I could take you now, she murmured, not as prey but as mine. His heart stuttered at the implication, yet the threat was still there in the edge of her words like the gleam of a blade in candlelight. She spoke of territory alliances, of how the surrounding clans would view a human bound to her, how they might challenge it, how they might try to take him from her. Kale felt the weight of that reality pressing in. He was no longer just a man stranded on a hostile world, he was now a symbol, a claim. When the first challenge came, it was sudden. A rival male larger than Kale and even larger than Sura lunged from the shadows, his roar splitting the air. The cub squealed, darting behind Kale. Sura met the attack with a blur of claws and fangs, but the force of the blow sent her skidding back through the muck. The rival's gaze landed on Kale, and in that moment Kale knew he was prey in the eyes of this beast. Adrenaline surged. He snatched the jagged spear he'd fashioned days earlier from bone and vine. The rival charged, but Kale moved not back but forward, his mind narrowing to the rhythm of survival. He ducked under the sweeping claw, drove the spear upward with all the fury of a man who refused to be taken. The bone tip tore through flesh, hot alien blood spraying across his arms. The rival bellowed, staggered. Sura was there in an instant, finishing the fight with a precision strike to the throat. Silence returned, broken only by Kale's ragged breathing. Sura's gaze was fierce now but different. There was no test in it, no question, only recognition. You are no one's prey, she said, you are mine. They stood together as the swamp's night chorus resumed. The cub pressed against his leg and he felt something shift inside him, not just relief or pride but the knowledge that he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. In saving the cub and standing with Sura, he had become part of something larger, something dangerous, something that might just consume him. As dawn's first light bled into the horizon, Sura placed a clawed hand lightly on his chest, her touch firm enough to remind him of her strength, yet gentle enough to make his pulse quicken. Come with me, she said, and it wasn't a request. He nodded, not because he had no choice but because some part of him had been waiting for this moment since the instant he'd found the cub trembling and alone. Whatever lay ahead, whether it was glory or ruin, he knew he would face it beside her.